In this video, I'm going to cover the steps to create this animated axonometric diagram using Lumion and its phasing feature. We're going to use Sketchup as the base modeling program. And then after we animate it in Lumion, we're going to take it into Photoshop and Premiere for some post-production. This was actually the first time I'd ever used the animated phasing tool in Lumion, but I wanted to record it and share it with you guys because I thought the process was so easy and the end result was actually really good. I think as designers, architects, students, we're always trying to push the boundaries of how we explain our work and visually communicate it. And to me, this animated diagram is a perfect example of doing that. You know, we always see the axonometric diagrams everywhere, right? To me, this is the next step. How can we bring those diagrams to life? And I think you'll see how simple this process is, that you'll want to incorporate this as soon as possible into your workflow. There are a couple of repetitive steps for this workflow, so I'm not going to cover all of them. If you have any specific questions, just leave a comment and I'll answer it with a little bit more detail. We'll start in our SketchUp model. As always, the cleaner your model, the easier this process is going to be, just like any diagram or rendering that you're going to do. But I think, especially for this animated phasing diagram we're doing, we need to be really careful with how we layer our model. Because to do this, in order to animate objects in Lumion, we need to export them separately from SketchUp. For me, what I found the easiest was to create all of my layers in the same sequence that I'm going to animate it in Lumion. You can see in my layers panel, I actually have each object or layer tied to a number, which represents the order in which I'll export it and import it into Lumion because of how it will be phased with the animation feature. So you can see right now, I'm showing you this site and I actually have a base that will start. And on top of that base, I'll have different portions of my site develop on top of it. So each one of these needs to be its own layer so that I can export it separately to create a staggered effect in the Lumion phasing feature. As we get going, I'll explain what I mean by that. And another example, I have a group called main, and that's going to be what you see here. This is kind of like the primary building or piece of the project. And I can flip on and off all of these layers from bottom to top, and it's going to be the exact same order that I have it animated in Lumion. Really, the key for this whole process is just understanding how you want to animate your diagram. You know, what comes in when? Do you start with the site? Do you start with the building? Do you want the furniture to come in separately? Once you understand that, I think setting up the file is actually pretty easy. And I think you'll see that as we go further. Now, I'm going to fly around my model and just look at the level of detail that I put into this in terms of the materials. And I think I actually only have like 10 materials in the entire model. So it's very simple. It's really all I needed for this basic animated diagram. Same with the furniture. I just did it in SketchUp because it's all very simple. They're not complicated shapes or geometry. It's not bogging down my model. There are some things that you might prefer to add in Lumion, like tables or chairs. That's totally fine. For this, I have most of my furniture in SketchUp, and then I'll add my trees, people, cars, stuff like that when we get to Lumion. Now that you have a basic understanding for how this model is set up, we're going to jump right in and start exporting our pieces to Lumion. So the first thing I want to export is my site base. So I turn off every other layer except for my site base layer. And then the way I found to do this easiest was to just do File, Save a Copy As, and then just name that file exactly what I have my layer named. So now you see the importance of keeping your layers very organized, because I'm just going to do the same step now for the next piece. This is the next piece I want to come in on my site. So I just do File, Save a Copy As, and then name that file exactly what that layer is. And then it's just rinse and repeat for each of the site pieces that I want to overlay on top of my base. So that's why I said I'm not going to show you me exporting each of the pieces, but you can see at some point I'll have exported all of the pieces for my site base, and then we can get into Lumion later and make those pieces fly in a staggered fashion, which we'll get to in a second. Now, I know it's a lot to take in, but really that's all you need to understand for this process between your SketchUp model and animating in Lumion. Once you get it down, like I just said, it's just rinse and repeat and apply it to different parts of your model. Before we get to Lumion, just one more example of how I exported from SketchUp to Lumion. For my structure, I wanted to create this staggered effect where each of the pieces came in separately. This time, instead of making a layer for each of the pieces, I just hide the ones I don't want to export at this time, keep the one turned on, and then I do File, Save a Copy As, and name it, Structure 01. So I know that that's the first piece of the structure. And then it's just rinse and repeat. I turn back on all the other pieces, hide everything except for the second piece of structure, and then I export, Save a Copy As, and name it Structure 02. And the last thing I want to stress about this is the reason why I'm saving a copy as for each of these pieces is so that when I import into Lumion, they'll all have the exact same origin. So I can easily place and make sure everything lines up easily without having to manually move things around in Lumion. And that's about it. I think we're ready to jump into Lumion now. There are some things I'll mention later that might relate back to the exporting process, but that's the foundation that you need to get things moving. Now we're going to jump into Lumion. We're just going to do the plain environment for a new level. And I'm not going to import everything. I already have it in a library to save some time. Watch my previous video if you need to learn how to import objects in Lumion. But basically, we're just going to import everything we just exported from SketchUp. And just like any rendering you do in Lumion, we're going to start dropping in our pieces. Obviously, the big difference here is now everything is going to be separated, right? So at first, I just wanted a clean white base to put my model on to create a nice surface for my rendering. And then you can see I'm bringing in my very first export, and this is my site base. So as you can see, I'm just typing in the coordinates 0, 5, 0, and those will be the same coordinates I use to place all the other things that I import into the model. And that's why we saved each of our layers out as a copy of our model so that it maintains that origin point. We can efficiently drop those pieces in and align them. The last thing I want to mention here is I already have materials applied. If you need help with that, just go to one of my previous videos. It's going to be like applying materials to any Lumion model. There's nothing special about it. Just wanted to save some time here. Now that I have my site base in, you can do this in any order you want, but I like to go ahead and set up my scene for my movie. So because it's going to be an animation, we use the movie tab, and then I'm just creating a couple frames here so that I can increase the duration of the video. And then I'm going to add the realistic style effect. Pretty simple. And then the first thing I want to do is go to the architectural tab, or the featured, I think it's in there now, and choose orthographic view. To make this a true axonometric, I'm going to enable the orthographic view and then go back to edit my clip, zoom out, make sure it's positioned the way I want it. And you can use the sliders on here. Just make sure it's a true isometric. And really the beauty about this whole process is that you can play around with different views. So you're not stuck to just one. It's not going to affect the animation. And now you can see I just wanted to refresh my view, added a few more clips, and I'm extending the time of this just so I have more time to play with. I can always shorten it later after I see how long my animation is going to take. Then we can hit OK. This looks good to me. I just applied the realistic effects. Like you can click on your viewport to get a preview, but really I didn't do much more adjustments to the realistic effects because I thought it looked pretty good. Now we can go ahead and start importing more of our individual exports from SketchUp. This is going to all be for the site at first. So you can see these look familiar because they're the layers we exported for our site model. And same thing, I'm just importing, dropping them in, and then setting the coordinates to 0, 5, 0 so that they all line up. And now each of these pieces are individual objects in Lumion, which is exactly what we want for the phasing effect. Now we're ready to start animating this first piece of our model. So I go back to my movie editor and I go to add effect. And then we want to go to the animation tab and choose animated phasing. Then we just click Edit under Animated Phasing, and it'll bring us to our phasing interface. And this is really simple. You get a timeline at the bottom. When you click Edit, it'll automatically give you one to begin with, an object to animate. But then after that, we can always add new ones, which I'll show you in a second. Up at the top left, we can just rename this object we're animating. I'm just going to call it Site. And then the next thing you want to do is click the blue Objects tab, and that's going to let us select all the objects that we want to animate. So for this one, I want all the pieces on my site to kind of rise up from the ground. So I'm going to select each of the pieces or objects that I imported from SketchUp separately. You can see I just selected to stagger in order of selection. So as I choose these, I'm thinking of how I want them to come in. The first one I choose will be the first one that rises up, and then so on. If we confirm that, you can see we go back to our editor and now they're gone. So if we hit play, you'll see that those objects we selected are now being animated. Now we can go up into the top left-hand corner to adjust some of the parameters to create the effect that we want. Default, it's going to be pop in. We want it to be ground rise so that it actually comes up from the ground. Next, we can choose when the animation starts. So when our object rises up from the ground, we can use the duration or the start time slider up in the top left. And then we can also just click and drag the blue bar for our object on the timeline. Next, we'll play with some of the other parameters. For instance, the duration of the animation. And we get a slider for this, just like the start time. And obviously, if you increase this, the animation is going to take longer. You can see on our timeline, the blue bar, the dark blue represents the actual time of the animation, and the light blue is once that object is fully animated in the model or phased into the model. And like I said, this was the first time I played with this. So it's trial and error. Increasing the duration will make the animation go slower, and decreasing it will make it go faster. So just see what works best for your model. Next, I increased the ease in slider a little bit. This, just like it sounds, it's gonna make the object slow down a little bit towards the end of their animation. And then I increased the stagger slider all the way because this is what's gonna create that staggered effect where the objects feel like they're following each other into the model. And as you can see, when I hit play, we can see how those changes affected the phasing animation. And I know I'm not giving you any golden rules for this because, like I said, I'm playing around with this just like you are. And what I found best is don't get too caught up in some of these parameters. Just toggle the sliders. That's what they're there for until you get the desired effect. And then you can just confirm, hit OK, and we can go back to our video editor. And if you hit play on this, it's going to represent the animation we just did inside the phasing interface. Just like before, at any point, we can click on our viewpoint to get a preview of what this will look like when we render it. The next thing I wanted to animate or phase in was the vegetation. I kind of wanted to feel like it was growing on the site. So you can see here, I'm placing my trees. Pretty simple. I didn't want to spend too much time on this. And this is the same way you place trees in any Lumion model you're working in. Just take note of, I'm choosing to place these now because in my mind, I know that the next step in my animation, I want to be the vegetation. That's why I'm placing these before I'm importing anything else into the model. Now, if we go to our movie editor, you'll see that our trees are going to show up before everything else. And we actually want the trees to come in after our site builds up. So in order to do this, we just need to animate them. Just like before, we go to our animated phasing feature, hit edit, and now you can see our animation for the site is still there. We just need to make a new one for the trees. So we click add phasing animation. I'm just going to rename it to trees. And just like before, we click on the edit objects and I choose stagger in order of selection. And I'm just going to go right down the row, selecting each of the trees in the order that I want them to fall in from. And I hit done. And now you can see we have our trees object slider here. And just like before, we can adjust the parameters for how long the animation is, if it's staggered, etc. For this, I'm going to keep it set on pop in because it kind of makes the trees look like they're growing, which is a pretty cool effect. And you can see here, it's pretty slow. This was just kind of my first test. So I'll adjust the duration. Maybe I don't want them to be staggered as much. That way they come in a little bit faster. All of those things. I'm not going to go into the details of that. I think it's self-explanatory. It's kind of fun actually to play with the sliders and get the desired effect that you want. And the best part about this tool is that it's real time. So as you make adjustments to your parameters, you're going to see it updated immediately, which will make it easy for you to get to the effect that you want. We can hit done. And just like before, we can preview this and you'll see my site comes in just how I like it, kind of staggered. And then all of my vegetation comes in. And then you can see I'll click on my viewport to get a preview of what it'll look like when it's rendered. Now we have our site looking pretty good. So I'm going to start bringing in some of the pieces for the actual building. And just a reminder, I'm not going to go through all these just because it'll get too repetitive. But we'll start and I'll kind of show you the same steps I did before, apply directly to these pieces for my building. I've already said it a couple times, but as I import each of the pieces of my model, I'm going to immediately animate them just to keep myself organized and not overwhelmed by all the objects in the model being in at once. This is a great way to build up your project just as you want the animation to read for someone seeing it for the first time. You can see I brought in the first level of the building that I have. It's kind of like the floor plate that's elevated off the ground. And I wanted it to rise up just like I had the pieces for the site. And then I just adjust the parameters, make sure it's not coming in too fast or too slow and at the right time. And I can hit done and then see the preview. The next thing I wanted to import is the structure for my building. And this is, if you remember, I exported each of these pieces separately so that I could create the staggered drop-in effect in the phasing tool. So now I'm going to import each one separately. And because I did a save as for the model, I can just enter in the coordinates and it's going to automatically align them. Now I'll note, if I wanted to take a shortcut here, I could have just imported one of these and then copied it inside Lumion, just like an array, and I could get the same effect. But this is just, I wanted to be more precise and make sure that each of my pieces of structure were in the correct location. Takes a little bit of extra time, but I think it makes sense for this phasing tool. Now that I have the structure imported, I can go to my video editor. You'll see it's there, so I need to animate it. Go to my phasing interface, add a new object layer. I'm going to name it structure. And then I can select my structure. I chose remember or drop in based on selection. Chose them all in order. And then I'm turning up the stagger, playing with the duration. You can see I forgot. It's set on pop in by default. I actually want it to be dropping in. So I changed that. So now it's coming from the sky. And then I just lowered the travel distance at the bottom there so that it doesn't feel like it's really totally falling from the heavens. It appears closer to the ground plane, which makes the whole animation more abbreviated. Now you just apply those same steps to all the other pieces of your project. And that's really about it. It's really simple. So I'm going to jump to more of the end result once I got all my other pieces in. And other than the exports from SketchUp, I also added in some cars and people in Lumion. And because this is just a diagram, I had a color override for all the people, and I just made them white, and they're actually kind of glowing, which makes a really cool effect for the diagram. And I want to wrap this up, but you can see I didn't make too many changes to the realistic style. I did, however, make sure to add reflection planes to my building. You can see that adding those reflection planes adds a lot of nice realism. And then, there are other features that I used, such as layer visibility. This is an older feature for animating in Lumion. And basically what this allows me to do is turn on and off certain layers throughout the animation. And one of those things specifically that I did for this was I had some lights turn on inside my building once the roof was animated on top of it. And it's really simple. All I did was put those lights on a separate layer in my model. And then using this layer visibility effect, I just turned on those layers at a certain timestamp once my roof got on my building. And then before that, they're just turned off so that it's not interfering with anything else in the model. I did the same for that little pavilion outside. Another thing that I added were the people and cars. And as you can see, they're actually animated. And this is really cool because I use the advanced tool feature and it works just fine with the animated phasing tool. So you can see inside the phasing interface, I just added another animation for the site entourage, and I just had the people pop in so they kind of grow in. It's really quick, but at that timestamp, I think it was like 46 seconds in the clip, I noted that time, and then I was able to add an advanced move feature that you see here. And starting at that 46-second mark, I started to animate some of my people. And I'm not going to go through all the steps of advanced move. There's plenty of videos out there about it. But I just wanted to illustrate here that this effect actually works with the animated phasing tool. And now we're ready to render this. So I'm going to click on Render Clip. And I'm going to do 5 stars, 60 FPS, and I'll do 1920 by 1080p. And I'll just save that. And I just wanted to note this, depending on your animation, this could take some time. I just ran this overnight. Obviously, if you lower the quality, it'll go faster. But for me, I think it was worth it to do the longer render time for the higher quality. Now what I'm doing is some post-production in Photoshop. I just imported the raw MP4 that we exported from Lumion and dropped it into Photoshop. And just like a regular image, we can adjust some of the color effects inside Photoshop. So I prefer to do the camera raw filter. I think it gives you really good control over the clarity and contrast and exposure of your image. So there's no science to this. I'm just kind of having fun with it. Just trying to make the diagram pop a little bit more. And there are kind of endless effects you can add right now. This is the first time I've actually edited a video in Photoshop. So it was kind of an experiment, but you can see now I added a new layer called white lines. And what I'm going to do is actually draw an outline on my axonometric section. So you can see me here just using a white paintbrush and drawing a pretty thin line on the edge of my section cut. And this is just a cool example, I think, of how you can start to imagine how to make your drawing unique and stylize it for your project. And maybe something didn't render exactly how you'd like it to. You know, for instance, the water, I think it looks fine, but I was like, kind of wish that was a little bit darker. So in Photoshop, I just outlined the cut where my water is being cut, and I just added some black poche over it, made it a little bit transparent to make it darker, because I felt like it needed to read darker than the actual surface of the water. And then I just decided to add a little bit more white line work on it. You know, I'm not being too careful here. I just wanted to get a quick effect to see how it would turn out. And I was quite happy, actually. The next thing I did, I just added a text layer. And this is another great example of how you can make your drawing unique. I just put the title of the project and then skewed it to make it in that isometric view and kind of stuck it on the edge of the water there so it's on the section cut, kind of similar to how you might label a physical model. And these are simple examples. You can go as crazy as you want and get really creative with it. But the last thing I wanted to do was create a transition at the end of the animation to a night view or a nighttime rendering of my project. So you can see here, I just exported this from Lumion, imported the still frame into my Photoshop file that I'm editing the video clip. And if I just drag it to the end here, I can add a transition just so it's a smooth dissolve effect. And I want to point out, you could also do this in Premiere. I just thought I was in Photoshop already for the color changes. So I figured I might as well add this in as well. And I'm by no means an expert when it comes to editing a video in Photoshop. So there might be other ways to do this. This worked for me. And I think, even the next time I do it, I might do something differently. But I think that's just part of the learning process. The last thing I did in Photoshop were some simple levels and saturation adjustments. And then I just went ahead and exported this as an MP4. And then as a bonus step, I imported this into Premiere just because I'm most familiar with audio in Premiere to add some cool sound effects, just like nature, some whooshing effects as objects came in. I think it added a little bit more interest to the video. And this could be its own tutorial. So I just wanted to give you a look underneath the hood to see how I got some of the sounds to line up with the phasing animation. And once we export that, that's what gets us to our final video here. And like I said, this is not your typical drawing that you think of when you think of your studio project or even a professional project. But honestly, it's just freaking awesome and a perfect example of how we can really start to push the boundaries of how we communicate our ideas. But yeah, thanks for watching. And I hope this video gave you a better understanding for how to use the phasing feature in Lumion and that you'll be able to implement it in some of your projects.